What's up, guys? Welcome to part 2 of episode 17, Out of the Shadows. This is an immediate follow-up, so you can binge watch this one. Stranger Things Season 3 better watch their back, because Out of the Shadows is... We're putting it all up at once now. You can binge watch it, so, just get on it, man. Have a nice day to really get your personal growth and mental health in the right place. Anyway, to pick up where I left off in the previous video. So as I said, I ended up starting to take Prozac. I kept seeing it come up as a treatment option for people with social anxiety. I was very depressed at this time, but I felt that my social anxiety was at the root of a lot of it. I was very nervous to go out and, barely functioning, so I felt that if I attack this, that the depression will kind of follow type logic, shall we say. So I went to see my psychiatrist, and I mentioned that, I had seen this as a treatment option. What do you think? And he said to me, he's like, well, I'm not 100% convinced that you have bipolar disorder, so I'm fully willing to try this. However, being that we're going to be using an antidepressant and not a mood stabilizer, as I said before, the mood stabilizer kind of prevents you from going into mania. Typically, someone who has bipolar disorder or falls onto that spectrum, shall we say, for lack of a more formal term, you have an antidepressant to deal with your depression, and the mood stabilizer prevents you from going too high into mania. Since we were going to be using strictly an antidepressant, there was the risk of mania. He informed me of this and was like, we're technically taking a chance. At the time, I was so depressed and in such a bad place, I really felt like, well, I have nothing to lose. So I started taking the Prozac, as I believe I mentioned in the first part, and I think I'm repeating myself just a little bit. But it was great, it was like, in a relatively short period of time, maybe about a month, my depression, my social anxiety, it was like a thing of the past. And I ended up getting a job that I was able to go to consistently, and it was a really good position. I ended up going back to school. Prior to this, I was attending college, and then I ended up taking a break as I wasn't sure that I wanted to continue with my original major, which was psychology. So I had taken some time off, and then with the depression setting in, I didn't really have a specified date as to when I was going to go back, nor a real plan of what I was going to do if I did go back. The job that I ended up falling into, a family member of mine had gotten the job, and I ended up being an accounting clerk. So it was an office job, as you would imagine by the title, and I was working in the accounting department. So I went back to school. I went to DeVry. I did online classes, and I switched my major to be a business major with a focus in accounting. My mentality here was I was getting the education for exactly with what the job I was working in. Getting experience while getting the education made sense. I was like, man, I'm going to go super far. And everything was going really, really well. And it went extremely well for about a year and a half. And then I was about 24 years old, and again, I had a manic episode. Now, this time was a bit different. I started to sleep less, but it wasn't quite as obvious. I wasn't illogical or irrational. I sort of saw this as being, okay, maybe we're getting into that territory of mania. I actually started to reduce the amount of the antidepressant I was taking, which, don't do that. I don't recommend doing that at all. You need to speak to your doctor if you are on psychiatric medication, and only adjust the dosage as he or she tells you to do. Don't play with that stuff. It's not good. It can send you into a very bad place. It's very dangerous to play with that kind of medication. Don't do that. Anyway, I started to dial that back as I felt the mania might be coming on. This went on for a few weeks. It was almost like I was getting close to mania, what they might call hypomanic, which is a lesser form of mania. It's possible that that's what that was. And of course, as usual, as I said before, you typically get to a point where then you go off the rails, you start behaving irrationally, you're not sleeping, it's unbalanced in a bad place. So what had happened was I was out all night. I was actually drinking with some people who I didn't know particularly well. Again, behaving very irrationally. I came home the next morning, ended up taking a nap for a while, and I was staying at my father's, and he had talked to my mother and my brother, as obviously he was concerned. My brother ended up calling me and saying like, hey, I spoke to your therapist, and we really think that you're manic right now, and this needs to be addressed. And as soon as he said it, I knew that he was right. So I was like, you're 100% correct. Let's do what we gotta do. My mom showed up at my dad's house, and the plan was to take me to the hospital. Typically, if someone is I shouldn't say extremely manic, I don't know if there's really degrees per se, but if you're manic, if you're experiencing psychosis, if you're suicidal, severely depressed, that sort of thing, you'll typically be hospitalized because you need to be balanced out, and if you're in a hospital setting, they can monitor you and monitor the medication much more easily than if you're at home and it's back and forth kind of thing. Anyway, I was 100% willing to go to the hospital if that's what we had to do, but being that I was reasonable and rational enough to say that, my parents decided, well, you know what, if you agree to go to the psychiatrist tomorrow, let's just do that. Just, go to bed, relax, whatever. And I was able to. I had actually taken some anti-anxiety medication to help me sleep. As I said, being manic, you don't just go to bed. But went to the doctor. Unfortunately, this was a different doctor. The psychiatrist I had originally had, he moved on to a different position, which was unfortunate. He was a great doctor. This psychiatrist that I was dealing with was not quite as good. He did not handle the manic episode particularly well. He defaulted to a mood stabilizer that I had used previously when I was in a much better place. I wasn't really manic by any means, so this wasn't the best way to control it. Similar to the first time, when the mania tapered off, I fell into a very severe depression, and at that time this was the most severe depression I had ever fallen into. And literally for me, it was like watching everything I worked for just crumble and fall away. I stopped going to school because I was extremely depressed and I didn't feel like I could handle it. I was working less. I was lucky enough to have a boss who had family members who had mental illnesses, so he did not fire me. He allowed me the time off that I needed, but as I said, I was in a very deep depression, and I felt like everything that I had worked for was essentially gone. And this went on for a few years. I was quite depressed. As I said, I still had a job. I was functioning in that regard. I lost touch with a lot of friends. Some of this in retrospect was just the fact of getting older. Obviously when you're in high school and college, you can keep in touch. There's fewer responsibilities, fewer things going on. You get older, people start having serious relationships, moving out, getting better jobs, getting married, that sort of thing. That was part of it. The other part of it was I was so withdrawn that certain relationships just kind of fell off, which was another fact that deeply saddened me. And for a few years this went on. As I said, it was definitely a pretty long depression considering it lasted years. And in 2015, my brother, who lives in Las Vegas, this is one of my brothers, the one I've continuously been referring to actually, and he suggested to come and stay with him. I had been living with my mother, and for anyone in their mid to late 20s, ideally, you're not going to really choose to live at home. Went out by him, and I felt way better. I felt really good. My depression was really basically gone. My social anxiety kind of faded away. Now, prior to this, I was getting slowly better. It's not like I went out there and then all of a sudden, bam, like I was good. But so I was doing really well, and I thought like, oh man, this is the solution. I should stay out here. This is the thing to do. And then when it came time to, all right, well, now if you're staying out here, you need to get a job. You need to build a life out here. I got super anxious, super scared, super depressed, and I ended up coming back home. So, came back home, saw my psychiatrist, my therapist, worked through some things. The years went on. Things were good for quite a while. 2017 was a difficult year. 2017 is when things really changed. Once I came back, after a few months, I was doing well. I started. I was dating, which was huge for me. I was more social. Things were going really well. And in 2017, what had happened was my grandmother was sent to the hospital. She had an issue with her heart. She was okay. However, this really scared my mother. I think it kind of showed her that my grandma was, she's mortal. She's going to die one day. And my mom became very stressed and very anxious, so that created a lot of anxiety at home. So again, I ended up going to stay with my brother in Las Vegas. My theory was, my anxiety was through the roof, which is uncommon. Typically, I deal with the depression and the social anxiety, and I don't usually have physical symptoms, of anxiety in terms of racing heart and that sort of thing. But that's what I was having, so I was really freaking out. I went to stay with my brother, and I realized after a pretty short time, maybe a month and a half, 2 months, that you know what, I need to be back home. I need to be around my family. I love my brother, but everything is back home. Came back. I was lucky enough to have my boss take me back immediately. And my plan was, all right, well, I'm going to start working consistently. I'm going to build a life out here. I'm going to get my own place. It's going to all be good, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, about a month after I was home, my boss, he was 62 years old. He was a friend, he was a mentor, he was a super great guy, very supportive. He ended up dying and passing away, He passed away, he had a heart attack, he died suddenly. Very unexpected, he took care of himself very well, so this was a shock to say the least. And losing him was incredibly difficult. I became extremely depressed, and it took me about a year to come out of that. And through some very deep therapy sessions, I got to learn a lot about myself. I learned, for one thing, that my boss was a pillar in my life, my professional life especially. He kept me working. I was able to lean on him. He made things okay for me consistently. And once he was gone, I had to learn how to stand on my own, and I started to rethink my entire life in terms of, I've always had a tendency to lean on other people, my brothers, my parents, things like that, and I had to really start to break it down and decide that I needed to start thinking for myself. Like, I had to worry about what I thought was right, not what everybody else thought was right. So that led me to personal growth. I'd been interested in self-help before, but as I started getting better at rethinking my life and developing all these new values, this is the place I sort of came to, which obviously I'm cutting some parts out here. I can't tell every single story, but that's what led me here. I want to be able to help people. I want to be an advocate for personal growth for anyone, whether you have mental health issues or not. But that's the whole point of this channel. I hope that me sharing helped. I hope that maybe some of you don't feel as alone anymore. And again, this was something I felt I had to do. I want to be as authentic as possible and tell the truth. As I said, I have a diagnosed mental illness. Currently, I am not depressed. However, I do have bad days that I still have to deal with. And nobody's perfect. For anyone watching who might think that, people have it easier than I do, or I just can't do it. I've been in some really tough places. It took me a long time to get to where I'm at, but it is possible to get better, and you absolutely can do it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please like, share, subscribe. Leave me some comments, your thoughts on this video, your thoughts for future videos, anything. Let's create some support here, guys. Hope everyone's having a great weekend so far. Like, share, and subscribe, and take care of yourselves.